Hi guys, in this video we're going to continue our discussion on 5 MCQs a day series which we are running for ESI, that is Economics and Social Issues portion, which is a very important component of RBI, NABARD and SEBI examinations to be held in 2019. The topic which we are going to cover today is India and UNFCCC, that is United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So here you can take a snapshot of the relevance of this particular series as well as the different courses which we are presently running for the different competitive examinations. So for SEBI grade A, this is relevant for the phase 2, and the same goes for RBI grade B, which is again relevant for phase number 2. And with regard to NABARD grade A, this is relevant for both phase 1 and phase 2. Now, before proceeding forward, let me also quickly tell you about the results that we have got in the past few years. So we have started this initiative of guiding students for these competitive exams, and we have been blessed with some of the very amazing results. So if we take a look at the RBI Grade B 2017 exam, we have got 27 selections in the final list, and in NABARD Grade A 2017, there were 11 selections in the final list. And in the NABARD Grade A 2018, 27 of our students, they made it to the final list, and out of the total generalist seats, which were only 46. And in RBI Grade B 2018, 287 plus interview calls have been received by our students, and the final result of this is still awaited. So now let's come back to our topic and start our discussion on India and United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So let's start with the first question. Which of the following is incorrect with regard to United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that is UNFCCC? It entered into force in 1992. COP is the supreme decision-making body of UNFCCC. It is parent treaty of 1997, Kyoto Protocol, all of the above or none of the above. So this is a very simple basic question on UNFCCC. So if we learn about UNFCCC, then it's an international environmental treaty, and this is one of the most important treaties with regard to environment. And this was negotiated at the Earth Summit, which was held in Rio de Janeiro, which is in Brazil, in 1992, and it entered into force in 1994. So it was negotiated in 1992, but it entered into force in 1994. It has near universal membership, and more than 190 countries including EU, they are the members of this particular organization. So almost entire world is very serious about the threat of climate change, and it is the parent treaty of the 1997 Kyoto Protocol, which was also ratified by the 192 of the parties to the UNFCCC. So if you have heard about this particular protocol, which is Kyoto Protocol, then this is the UNFCCC is the parent treaty of this particular protocol. If you're not aware about this protocol, don't worry, we are going to learn about this one in the coming questions as well. The ultimate objective of both the treaties is to stabilize the greenhouse gas emissions concentrations. So this is basically concerned with climate change, and it wants to stabilize what we are emitting into the atmosphere. So whatever pollutants in the form of greenhouse gases they are being emitted, they need to be stabilized and controlled in order to prevent their impact on the human system as well as the climate system. So we do not want these emissions to impact the human health and the overall environment health. So that's why we are concerned about stabilizing such kind of emissions. Now further, if you talk about this UNFCCC, then Conference of Parties or COP is the supreme decision making body of the UNFCCC. Now all states that are parties to this UNFCCC, they are represented at the Conference of Parties. So all the states, they regularly meet together and discuss about the threats to the environment, and they discuss what are the actions that are required to tackle these threats, and this is done through the Conference of Parties or COP. So at COP, all parties review the implementation of the convention, and they take the decisions which are necessary to promote the implementation of this particular convention. Now till date, 24 COPs have been held, and here's a list of all the COPs that have been held with regard to UNFCCC. So you can see that the first one was held in Berlin, Germany in 1995, and the most recent one, it was in 2018 in Katowice, Poland, and in between you can see there were different COPs which have been held, and you should spot when India had this COP. So you can see that in 2002 COP 8 it was held in New Delhi, India. So this is another very important fact from this particular scenario. So this is what we have to remember. We need to remember the first one, we need to remember when it was held in India, and we need to remember the most recent one. And in between there are other important ones, like there is a Kyoto one because there is a separate protocol assigned to it, and there is also a Paris Agreement because then again there is a separate Paris Agreement assigned to it, and there is a Doha Amendment to Kyoto Protocol. So this also becomes important for us. So these are something which you must not forget at any cost. So guys, now we can easily answer this question that all the statements they are correct except the first one, because this UNFCCC convention, it came into force in 1994. So here the answer is going to be option number 1. Now let's further our discussion and come to the next question. Which of the following is correct with regard to 2018 United Nations Climate Change Conference? It took place between 2nd and 15th December 2018 in Katowice, Poland. It is the 20th conference of parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The most important outcome of it was that the countries have agreed on rules for the implementation of the 2015 Paris Agreement. So this is with regard to the latest UN conference. So we must be aware about the most recent conference which have been held very recently, less than a month ago. So we must be aware about this. So let's learn about this 2018 UN Climate Change Conference. So this conference, it took place between 2nd and 15th December 2018, and it took place in Katowice in Poland, and it was the 24th conference of parties. So it was COP number 24. It is also referred to as Katowice Climate Change Conference or Katowice Climate Talks. So if a question is asking about Katowice Climate Talks or Katowice Climate Change Conference, it is referring to the COP 24. And the most important outcome of this COP was that the countries, they have agreed on the rules for implementing the 2015 Paris Agreement. So if you are aware, this Paris Agreement was a landmark agreement in the field of climate change, and we are also going to learn about this agreement in the coming slides as well. So this is a very important outcome of this particular COP 24. So let's take a look at the major outcomes of COP 24. So the first one is the participating nations, they agreed on the rules to implement the Paris Agreement that is going to come into effect in 2020. So the Paris Agreement will come into effect in 2020, and what are going to be the rules for its implementation? They have been agreed upon at COP 24. So these rules, they are regarding how the member nations, they are going to measure their emissions and how they are going to report that what efforts they are making towards cutting their emissions. Further, the members of the conference did not agree to welcome the IPCC report on 1.5 degree Celsius. So this is another important outcome, that the report was not welcomed. The US, Saudi Arabia, Russia and Kuwait, they refused to welcome the IPCC report. So if I talk about this particular report, it was recently published, and it talks about the threats which are posed by the rise in temperature of 1.5 degree Celsius. So this report, it mentions that we should work harder and we should continue to reduce our emissions to achieve this particular ambitious target, and we must strive to achieve this one. But some countries, they have not welcomed this report. So that's why the conference did not agree to welcome this particular report of IPCC. Further, the parties, they agreed to record their pledges in a public registry as per the existing interim portal. So all the parties, they are making their pledges with regard to their contribution towards cutting out the climate emissions, cutting out the greenhouse gases emissions. So they are going to put all their pledges in a public registry. Further, it was also agreed among the members that future pledges should cover a common time frame, and this time frame should begin from 2031, and the number of years for this time frame are going to be decided later. So the most important thing is that the countries, they have agreed that right now, though we are taking on the pledges, but now we do not have a common time frame. We are just implementing the pledges own as per our own convenience. So we have our pledges, we have our targets, but there's a lot of flexibility in those targets. And now we want to move towards a common time frame which is going to be put in place from 2031 as per the decision taken in COP 24. So guys, now we can easily answer this question that the statements 1 and 3, they are the correct ones, but the second one is not correct because it was not the 20th but the 24th conference of parties to the UNFCCC. So answer is going to be option number 2. Next question, which of the following is incorrect? So this question is basically with regard to India's involvement with regard to UNFCCC. So first statement is India ratified UNFCCC in 1993. Second, India ratified Kyoto Protocol to UNFCCC in 2002. And the third statement reads India ratified Paris Agreement to UNFCCC in 2016. So these are the three statements which are given to us and we have to find which of the following is incorrect statement. So let's try to find out. So if I talk about India's membership of this UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, then India became a member of this particular convention in 1992 and ratified it in 1993. So it is the date of 1993 in which India finally ratified this UNFCCC convention. And if we talk about the Paris Agreement and the Kyoto Protocol, so this is the status with regard to the same. So Paris Agreement, it was ratified in 2016 and the Kyoto Protocol, it was ratified in 2002. So India is a party to the most important treaties or the most important conventions which are there with regard to the climate change under the aegis of UNFCCC. And 1993 is for UNFCCC, Paris Agreement is 2016 and Kyoto Protocol, it is 2002. Now we have already learnt about UNFCCC, but now let's briefly learn about Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Climate Agreement. So friends, Kyoto Protocol, it's an international greenhouse gas emission reduction treaty. So it's a treaty through which we have to reduce our greenhouse gases emissions, and this one is linked to UNFCCC. Now why this is called Kyoto Protocol? Because it was adopted in Kyoto, Japan in December 1997, though it finally entered into force only in 2005. Now this protocol is based on this very important principle, which is principle of equity and common but differentiated responsibilities. So this is the principle of CBDR. So this principle, it places the obligations on developed nations to undertake the mitigation targets, and they have to reduce their emissions, and they have to take up mandatory obligations with regard to reducing their emissions, and at the same time they also have to provide the necessary support, technology and financial resources to the developing nations to achieve their targets. So this is the situation with regard to this principle of CBDR. So developed nations, they have mandatory targets, but the developing countries like the India, they have no mandatory mitigation obligations or targets under the Kyoto Protocol. So this is about this very important principle. And the first commitment period under the Kyoto Protocol, it was from 2008 to 2012, and the second commitment period of this particular Kyoto Protocol, or which is popularly referred to as Doha Amendment, for the period 2013 to 2020, it was adopted in 2012. So this particular amendment, it basically extended the commitment period under the Kyoto Protocol from 2013 to 2020 as well. Now let's also briefly talk about the Paris Climate Change Agreement. So this particular agreement, it was formulated within the framework of UNFCCC. So this is another agreement under the aegis of UNFCCC. It facilitates the enforcement of global greenhouse gas reduction measures. So we have again agreed that we have to reduce these greenhouse gases emissions, and this agreement is a further step in this direction. So it talks about how we are going to work towards this particular goal in the post 2020 period. That is post Kyoto Protocol scenario. So we have already learned that Kyoto Protocol, it was extended till 2020. Now what is going to happen after 2020? This is going to be as per the Paris Climate Agreement. So this agreement, it was adopted by the representatives of 195 countries at the 21st Conference of Parties to UNFCCC, which was held in Paris in December of 2015. So that's why this is known as Paris Agreement. So it is related to COP21 of Paris. Now, as per this agreement, all the countries, they have agreed that they are going to work together, and they will work together to limit the global temperature rise to, this is very important, well below 2 degree Celsius. So 2 degree Celsius is the target, and the exact target is well below 2 degree Celsius. So it's not going to be like slightly below 2 degree Celsius, it's well below 2 degree Celsius, and they have to strive for achieving this 1.5 degree Celsius target as well. So this is a very important target of this particular agreement. And this mitigation which is to be done, it will be based on consensus among the members, and they are going to put in their intended nationally determined contributions. So each and every country, they are going to voluntarily come together, and they are going to put in their nationally determined contribution. That is what is going to be their contribution towards towards this goal of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. So they are going to be known as intended nationally determined contributions. So guys, now we have learned a lot about these conferences, Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement. So we have seen that all these statements, they are correct. So the incorrect statement is none of the above. So the answer is going to be option number 4. Now let's move to the next question. Which of the following is a part of the India's commitments under INDC to the Paris Agreement? Options are reducing greenhouse gas emission intensity of India's GDP by 33 to 35% below 2005 levels by 2030. 40% of the India's power capacity should be based on non-fossil fuel sources. Creating an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2 equivalent through additional forest and tree cover by 2030. All of the above or none of the above. So we have in the previous slide learned about this concept of intended nationally determined contributions. So this question is asking about what are India's intended nationally determined contributions under the Paris Climate Agreement. So if you talk about India's responsibility or the India's commitments, then India has put in 3 important commitments under the INDC. So these commitments, they are reducing greenhouse gas emission intensity of India's GDP by 33 to 35% below 2005 levels by 2030. So we have to reduce this emission intensity as a percentage of India's GDP. Further, 40% of the India's power capacity would be based on non-fossil fuel sources, creating an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2 equivalent, and this carbon sink is to be created by additional forest and tree cover by 2030. So these are some 3 most important commitments which have been made by India under the INDC. So now we can easily answer this question that all these statements which are given with regard to India's commitment, they are all correct, and the answer is going to be option number 4, that is all of the above. Now let's move to the next question. Union Cabinet has recently approved the submission of Dash Biennial Update Report to UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, that is UNFCCC. Options are 2nd, 4th, 6th, 8th or none of the above. So guys, India is mandated to submit a biennial, that is every 2 years India has to submit an update report which would contain the update of national greenhouse gas inventories of India and the information with regard to the actions which India is taking to mitigate the greenhouse gas emissions as a party to UNFCCC. Now, Union Cabinet has recently approved the submission of second such biennial update report to UNFCCC, giving India's national greenhouse gas inventory of 2014. So this is also important. The period is 2014. And this report, it contains 5 major components. They include national circumstances, so circumstances in India with regard to climate change, our greenhouse gas inventory, the actions which we are taking to mitigate this greenhouse gas emissions, the finance, technology and capacity building needs, and the support which have been received, and the efforts which are making towards domestic monitoring, reporting and verification of the emissions under the arrangements. So this is something which is very important because this is a very recent news, and India has recently approved this second biennial update report. So we have to remember this. So if you look at the key highlights of this particular report, then as per this report, in India, a total of 2.607 billion tons equivalent of greenhouse gases, they were emitted from all the activities if we exclude this category of land use change and forestry in 2014. Further, this is a very important point that energy sector, it accounted for 73%, industrial processes and product use 8%, agriculture 16% and waste sector 3% of all the emissions. So the highest contributor was energy sector. Also, This is a very important news for India that India is on the course for achieving the target for emission intensity of the economy and share of non-fossil fuel based power capacity. So if you remember, we talked about how India's INDCs they have been framed, and two of the points were with regard to reducing the emission intensity and with regard to promoting non-fossil fuel based power capacity. So India is on the course for achieving those respective targets. So this is a very positive and good news for India. So now we can easily answer this question that the Union Cabinet has recently approved the submission of second biennial update report to UNFCCC. So here the answer is going to be option number 1. So guys, this was all about our discussion for today. If you have any query, you can drop us a mail at hello@edutap.co.in, or if you want to know more about our courses, you can visit our website at www.edutap.co.in. Or in case of any query, you want to get into touch with us personally, you can call us at 8146 207 241. So friends, if you enjoyed watching this video, please like the same, share it with your friends, and do subscribe to our YouTube channel. And in case you wish to get regular updates from us, you can even join our Telegram channel, the link of which is given here as well as in the description of this particular video. Now, an additional benefit which you can get by joining this Telegram channel is that you can fetch the PDFs of all the discussions which we are doing on YouTube through this particular Telegram channel, which is going to be very helpful for you in revision. So thank you friends. Happy learning.